Hello gang, and welcome back. Tattoo Biker here with you. And tonight, we're riding through the mysterious Arizona desert where I've had a recent surge of reports about cryptids and other high strangeness. The truth is that Arizona has long been a hotspot for encounters with unidentified and terrifying beings, from the vast Sonoran Desert to the mysterious Superstition Mountains. The state is literally a breeding ground for the unexplained. In one chilling tale tonight, a young man tells of possible Skinwalker encounters on the Navajo reservation. And in another, a couple witnesses a strange, winged humanoid flying above their home. For these stories and more, grab your canteen and let's ride to Arizona.
Number 1. Dear TB, I have a story that I'd love to share with you. You see, growing up, I lived in northeastern Arizona, literally about 5 minutes south of the Navajo reservation in Winslow. Naturally, being that close to the reservation, or the res as they call it, skinwalkers were always a huge topic of conversation among the locals, and we all took it pretty seriously. Stories of personal experiences abounded, and I was no different. My family had gone camping in a little spot about 50 miles or so south of a town called Hart Canyon, near Wiggins Crossing, if anyone's interested. We had been there all day, and I was extremely familiar with the area, as we had camped there about 20 or so times before. So my parents let me just wander around alone in the woods, and this was back in the early 90s. Anyway, I had some G.I. Joes that I'd been playing with in a nearby creek, about 80 yards from our campsite. There were no other campers there with us. My mom had called me back to camp for dinner, so I left and ate. Played around camp for a while, and then realized that I'd forgotten my toys back at the creek. So I grabbed a flashlight and headed back that way. I knew right where I'd left them, so in no time, I saw them and grabbed them up. As I squatted down to grab them at the edge of the water, a sudden urgency that I'd never felt before ran down my spine. I remember being simply frozen because of the fear, like the little boy on E.T. when the alien comes out of the field for the first time and he's trying to scream for his family. I look up and pointed my flashlight at the other side of the creek, and about 10 yards down the way, I saw something. At first, I thought it was a deer, but it was standing up, so I thought it might be a bear, but it was way too skinny and didn't have enough poofy hair. It slunked around behind a tree and peered out at me. I seriously was too scared to move. I had just read a bit about Bigfoot for the first time, since it wasn't really popular in my area. And I thought for a long time that that's what it was that I saw. I finally had seen enough to gather my wits and scramble as fast as I could back to the camp. I told my parents, and they kind of dismissed it as my imagination, so I just stayed close for the rest of the trip. About 2 years later, I was at my house. I have 2 dogs, and they were outside dogs, and lived their whole lives in my backyard. One night, they went completely psycho, barking at first at something in the alley behind my house, and then they both started whimpering. I had my window open, and one of my dogs straight up jumped up through the window, frantically chewing through the screen, forcing its way into the house, and wouldn't leave the house for 3 days. Another time, when I was about 13, we used to play night games in the town, mostly because there was nothing else to do. We would walk around our neighborhood and act suspicious, so the cops would come and chase us around. And then we'd run down the alleyways and hop into random folks' backyards to hide. Now, it was extremely common to see an intoxicated Navajo or Hopi in the alley, so it was no big deal to see one in the alley behind my house that night. As we, being two of my friends and myself, ran from a police car hot on our tail. We saw him plain as day standing in our way. We ran around him and jumped into the nearest yard to hide. We waited for the cop to pass us and hopped back out. Literally, maybe 3 minutes had gone by. We ran back the way we came, and as we got to the point where the drunk man had been, he was gone. But in his place was a coyote, just sitting there watching us. We ran right past it, just feet from it. And anyone who knows coyotes knows they'll bail way before you get close to them. But this little bugger held his ground and calmly sat and watched us as we ran past. We all freaked out and stayed inside for maybe a month. My last experience was when I was about 15 or 16. My brother has a girlfriend who lives in a small community just south of Winslow called Starlight Pines, about 25 miles-ish away. Well, we went to see her one day, and as we drove out, about 15 miles away, we saw a native guy standing on the side of the road. This was pretty odd because the res was north of town, and it was rare to see anyone on foot south of town because it's mainly just desert for literally 80 miles. Anyway, we see this guy, and he looked normal enough. Flannel shirt, jeans, etc. We got to our destination and hung out with my brother's girlfriend and her family well into the night when we decided to head back home. We hopped in his truck, a Chevy S10, and drove back the way we came. In the same spot, we saw the native dude. He was still there. I remember thinking, that guy must be crazy, standing out there all day and into the night. What could he be doing? Right as we passed him, we heard a loud bang on the back of the truck. At first, we thought we'd hit an animal, but I hadn't felt anything that we'd run over. I turned around and looked out my back window. My brother started to slow down, thinking there may be something wrong with the truck. But in the brake lights, I could see the native guy chasing us. We were easily going 60 at this point, and we were about to stop. The guy is in the road, just feet behind us. I scream at my brother to not stop, to gun it. And he does, and being a Chevy S10, it had a speed governor on it at 80. 2 miles this guy keeps up with us. We are seriously freaking out when I ask my brother, what if we don't make it back to town, or what if when we have to slow down once we get close? After those 2 miles that stretched on forever, it seemed, I looked back and he was simply gone. When we got home, we booked it to the house and told our parents. And the next morning, I get up to head somewhere and look at my brother's truck, thinking about the night before. I wondered what the loud bang was just before we started getting chased. Inspecting the truck, I found a handprint smeared in the dust from about 2/3 over to the right and then smeared to the right taillight. I never went there again. Sorry this was so long, but those are my experiences with what I'm convinced were skinwalkers. Thanks for reading. Signed, Anthony. Number 2. Hi, TB. I heard you on a podcast recently, and I have a question. I saw a sort of wolf-like creature on the side of the road. You see, I live in a small border town in southwestern Arizona, and there's not a lot to do around here. So just cruising around is a great time killer. My girlfriend and I were out on a date about a week ago, and by the end of it, we were just cruising around talking, and I'm listening to music until about 1 a.m. We decide to call it a night, and as I'm driving her back home, we both see this giant, 4-legged creature on the side of the road with its back to us. Its fur was very rough looking, and it had this darkish gray color to it. I immediately thought it was a messed up giant mountain lion, since they're not uncommon around here. I slowed up a bit so we could take a better look, and that's when it turned around and faced us. And that's when I knew we were dealing with a whole new, different being here. It had the most ferocious and terrifying face that I've ever seen. It had a very long snout, just like a wolf. It had its mouth open, and we could see some big and sharp-looking teeth. It was hunched over, making its back rise, and its fur, was standing up just like a cat does when it's scared. When the lights of the car hit its eyes, they seemed to glow bright orange, as well with a dead and lifeless look. After seeing this, I stepped on the gas and we got the hell out of there. My girlfriend and I were in shock for a while until I asked her if she had seen that thing or if I was just going crazy. She confirmed and gave the same exact description of the creature. After some digging around, I found out that the only type of wolf that was once found here is the Mexican gray wolf, but they are critically endangered now and were exterminated from this area a long time ago. That type of wolf can only be found in southeastern Arizona and southwestern New Mexico. The sheer size and appearance of this thing rule out coyotes and dogs entirely. I'm amazed and a bit worried as to what we witnessed that night. What could this thing be? Signed, Daniel. Number 3. Hey Tattooed. On May 21st, 2014 at around 7:30 p.m. in Laveen, Arizona, while sitting at our dining table having dinner, my wife, my 17-year-old daughter and I saw what we thought was a flying humanoid pass by our sliding glass door window. My daughter said that out of the corner of her eye she saw a brown mass swoop down past the window, but couldn't make out any detail, only that it was big and covered the entire window area. I also saw a brown mass, and as I turned to look, it seemed like a pair of large legs swooped down through my sprinklers and heading in a westerly direction. My wife, who was facing the door directly, said she saw a human figure as well. She stated that it flew towards the ground. She said it was dark brown and looked like the person was lying face down with their arms to their sides. She estimated the body length at 6 to 7 feet and that the wingspan was at least twice the length of the body. I immediately ran to the door and ran outside to look. I didn't see anything more, but I also didn't see any birds. Later that night, my wife and I both heard flapping sounds coming from the backyard. I looked out the bedroom window, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. For almost a month, we would occasionally hear these large flapping sounds, but were never able to catch a glimpse of the source of what could be making them. Thanks. Signed, Kent. Number 4. Dear Biker, in 2015, I took a trip through northern Arizona. I live in Phoenix, hiking, taking photos, and just enjoying nature. At one location, it was late, so I decided to park for a few hours, or spend the night in my truck. I had the truck turned off with the window down, and there was a huge, full moon in the sky behind me. I was looking at it, actually, in my outside rearview mirror. And then this being walked from my left to my right, about 4 to 6 feet behind the tail of my truck. It stopped and looked at me. This thing was about 8 feet tall, super skinny with long arms with the elbow lower than ours would be. The neck was about 1 foot long, pointing forward a bit, with an oval head and what looked like a 4-foot tube extending from the jaw down forward, almost like a very long beard coming to a point. The moon was behind it, so I saw it in silhouette. It walked really slowly, like it was struggling to move. I tried to roll up my window, but the truck was off. Slowly, it slightly turned its shoulders towards me, and that long, freakish neck turned just like an insect would. With that face looking right at me, I thought that was it. I'm dead. This thing was so skinny that I figured it had to be hungry. I had my hand on the keys. If it came towards me, I'd turn the truck on, roll up the window, and take off. The head turned back forward and it walked on. I waited a full minute and then started the truck and took off. A few months later, I decided to go back, but this time in the daytime. I found the exact spot. There was nothing there but dirt and desert. No buildings for miles, all just dirt road. I traveled around the area since I was there, did a bit of hiking, and came upon a place and parked. It looked like an old crash site, with a hole in the ground and big rocks, all burned and charred looking, with bushes growing in it. Whatever happened here happened a long time ago. And then I could hear digging sounds, like heavy machinery, trucks backing up and making the beeping sound. Like a lot of them, but there was nothing around me for miles, just this desert. I drove around a bit to see where the sound was coming from, but all I could see was that I was alone out here. I went back to that spot and could clearly hear lots of trucks busy at work, like a major digging construction machine. I then got on my knees and put my ear to the ground. The digging sound was actually coming from underneath me. I thought that was odd. Nothing around here that would identify that area for construction. Out in the desert on a very simple dirt road. Seeing no one pass by at all. Then I noticed that out in the desert, two big white shiny pickup trucks facing me. The windows were all blacked out and they seemed to appear out of nowhere. And then behind me were two more. It was just me, the four trucks, and a lot of people digging underneath me. I got concerned, hopped back in my truck, and left. After a bit, I slowed down. No one was following me, so I drove until I got to the next road. There was an underpass to the road to go north, so I take a right, go south, go under the underpass, and take a left. At both exits were these same big white pickup trucks, the glass tinted black and just waiting. Whichever way I turned, one of them would be behind me. I headed south and the truck behind me immediately followed. The other truck turned around and followed. The truck was right on my bumper. It was so large I couldn't see in its window, but it was tinted so dark that I'd not seen anyone driving anyway. I was going 90 miles an hour and it was still right on my tail. The other one tried to overtake me. I was weaving between the two lanes to keep it from passing. As I'd gone into the left lane to block the second truck, the right one behind me tried to pass me. This went on for miles until there was an exit with a few shops there. I took that exit and both trucks slowed, did a U-turn, and retired back. I knew they had my license plate, so I figured I was screwed. I uncovered something that they didn't want to be found. I went home and just waited for a knock on the door to be shot or whatever, but nothing ever happened. I got no contact, no warning, nothing. I've been afraid to tell my friends as they might be incriminated too. So years passed and nothing happened. It's been 7 years now, and I've never gone back to either location. With me seeing that thing walking around, and where I heard the digging underground and those very earthly trucks trying to run me off the road, do you think there could be a connection? I don't know. Either way, I stopped going out into the desert from then on. Thanks for reading. Signed, Albert. Number 5. Hey biker, we live in northern Arizona, in a rural area on the edge of several thousand acres of grassland that locally they call a prairie. The prairie is very open with scattered small pines and juniper bushes, and around the edge of the prairie is dense ponderosa pine forest. My husband and I live right next door to my mom. She's 81 and doesn't get around that well. I work from home and have a small office upstairs at her house so that I'm around to help her out during the day. So this was back in January of this year. It was the 23rd around 5:45 p.m. I was in my office and Mom was downstairs in her comfy chair, which faces out to a great view of the prairie. I was working on my computer and suddenly I heard her yelling for me in a very alarmed tone. I ran downstairs thinking that either my dog was throwing up on the carpet or something was on fire. It was like somewhere in that range of urgency. Let me add in right here that she's very level-headed and not overly excitable, and 100% right in her mind and still sharp as a tack. And I have to also add that she can see pretty damn well for being 81. When I got to her, she was looking out at the prairie and said that she saw something really weird. Later, she said it was the strangest thing that she's ever seen. While she was describing it, I grabbed a pair of binoculars and looked at where she was pointing. She said that her first impression was that it was a horse, but then she immediately realized that it wasn't. She said that it reminded her of a horse wearing a cape or of a giant bat, and that it was nothing that she had ever seen before. It was tall, running upright on two legs, coming straight at her, very dark in color, and had something flapping all around the upper part of it, like a cape might be. She said that although she didn't know what it was, she knew she really didn't like it, and really didn't want it to get to the house. I could tell, both at the time and when she talked about it over the next couple days, that it did rattle her quite a bit. Again, though, she's not at all prone to being nervous, and she doesn't share my interest in the strange and unusual. She said that she had looked up and spotted this thing coming at her, but then as she watched, it appeared to crouch down and just disappear next to a bush. The terrain on the prairie rolls just a little, so that would be possible without it actually vanishing into thin air. As we were watching the area around that bush, my husband came in. We told him what was up, and he was watching too when we all saw something again, but just for a few seconds. It moved from where we were watching, away to the right where it disappeared again. My husband says that he saw what could have been two ravens fighting. What I saw was very dark in color, and my first impression was something like a man running, but all hunched over. Or maybe something like the back end of a bear. What my mom saw, and she didn't tell me this until weeks later, was an unnaturally tall and skinny black dog. The light was still quite good at this point, and my husband went to get our little drone to fly to the prairie and find what he could see. I went to an upstairs window with my binoculars to see what I could see from a higher vantage point. Neither of us spotted anything. Now, we do have black bears in the area, but I've never in over 20 years seen one out on the prairie in daylight. Not impossible, but not likely, and even less likely that neither of us would have seen it moving away across the prairie. The next day, we went out to look at the spot where we had seen it, which was about 300 yards from Mom's window. The ground was wet and muddy, but we found no tracks, although we were leaving very obvious footprints. I went and stood next to the bush where Mom had seen it crouch down. Then I called her to ask to look and compare my height to what she had seen. She said it was 1.5 to 2 times taller than me, and I'm 5'4", making this thing 8 to 10.5 feet tall. No wonder she was freaked out. If it was a bear, it was running really well on its hind legs and waving a cape over its head. For good measure, I'd also asked Mom if it could possibly have been an elk with a trash bag stuck in its antlers, and she said no, absolutely not. All this was super weird, but here's the part of the story that I really had to think about later. A couple of hours before all that happened, I'd been out on the prairie with our dog for our daily walk. She likes to roam around, dig holes, and she occasionally chases a rabbit, but almost never barks. That afternoon, though, she started barking like crazy at something. Hackles up, staring off into the distance, and at one point came running back to me with her tail tucked, which was very unlike her. I couldn't see any reason for it at all, but it creeped me out just a little because I had, just then, been thinking about a recent interview I had heard describing a dogman story. Specifically, I was thinking about the idea of dogmen guarding portals and also what I would do if I were to ever see such a thing. So I started thinking about it. We aren't that far from Sedona. Did we have a portal drift up our way? A neighbor that we know pretty well had a weird UFO sighting over the prairie the summer before. Maybe we have a full-time portal. Who knows? Signed, Katrina. And there it is. All I have for tonight. 5 true stories of cryptids and strange anomaly reports from the great state of Arizona. I appreciate you joining me for this ride, and as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories about these in the comments down below. And if you have an encounter or an experience to share, you can always reach out to me via the email that's in the description of this video, and your story may just wind up in a future episode. So anyways, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.